Can you hear me? So. Ladies, gentlemen, we seem to be on time, sharp on time, 10 minutes past 5, that's the schedule. Welcome everybody who managed to spare their time for this panel. Thank you for being here. We have quite a challenging panel this afternoon, late afternoon, and a worthy panel. So, I will read the title of this panel, What Will Security Architecture Look Like After the War? How can we restore stability in Europe? Well, I think all the panels are challenging in this, for this event, this forum, but this is probably rather more challenging than others because the speakers are supposed to look into the crystal ball and give answers which are not yet given, I think, by anybody. But I will quote, or partially quote, hopefully accurately, Prime Minister of Romania this morning when he mentioned that such a forum has the virtue of provoking questions. The questions are to be then transformed into proposals and the proposals into decisions, because what is being discussed here finally gets into laboratory, the laboratory of the think tanks, of the advisors, and finally, one way or another, it enriches the choices of the political deciders. And it's quite a challenging and fateful moment. Now, about this panel, I think it responds to the channel of the theme, because you have foreign policy and security practitioners, such as, but also academics. Some of them blend all these qualities. Professor CHIFU, who is advisor to the Prime Minister of Romania for international relations and security, has weared two hats of academia and practice of international relations. Now, Dr. KAIM, he is coming from the intellectual powerhouse, I would say, fueling the foreign policy of the Bundesrepublik, of the Federal Republic of Germany. Everybody knows the SWP. And I know about your activity from our embassy in Berlin. Ambassador Cristian DIACONESCU, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also doctor in international relations and, how to say, a fine lawyer of international law. I had the privilege to work with him for years, I think already 25 years. And we have been witness to many interesting events in the neighborhood, always looking east, closer east, farther east. And Dr. MUSSETTI, the geopolitical analyst from Limes. I think those of you in this business know this high-quality geopolitical review, Limes. Dr. MUSSETTI has, who just launched a book in Romania yesterday, is a challenge for myself. Sometimes I think he knows better, not Romanian, but also, maybe also Romanian, but Romania, the Republic of Moldova, and our neighborhood here, and we are looking forward to your input. Now, Time is not very generous with us, but the panel with 4 speakers, I think, is manageable. I would suggest 8 minutes each, so that we have some 20 minutes of open discussions, questions and answers. They will also encourage the dialogue between you. According to my organizer here, I will first give the floor to Mr. CHIFU. Please enlighten us, Mr. CHIFU.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and let me also salute all the co-panelists. It's a privilege to be here with you. So, what was asked from us is for sure not guessing. So no prediction will be made. I'm more inclined to do prospective studies, which means alternative scenarios. It's far more interesting, and on the other hand, it helps us to avoid strategic surprise as much as we can. Now, how the world will look, how Europe's security will look like, I will just stay to the propositions that we could underline, or if you want, are relative certainties. First, I think that what we are seeing, we see a redistribution or a distribution of power in the sense of actually dismantling the great accumulations. We no longer have superpowers, we have just 2 great powers and a number of regional powers, and none of the great powers is Russia. On another point, we are seeing a type of democratization of the international relations and security studies once technology and new resources can offer to rather small state or a medium state the privilege of becoming a relevant actor into a very specific and narrow part of the technology, which can become at some point very relevant or absolutely important, and then this relevance and the strategic weight of that particular actor can rise dramatically. Happening so with a number of technologies and rare earths, some other resources, this is democratizing, if you want, the space, in the sense that actually we can have actors emerging with high importance, even though we would not rate it if we are considering only economy and military capabilities, but we need to move to some other parts of the geopolitical power. Europe. I'm not very sure if somebody can tell us how the security of Europe will look like. What we can say, and I'm referring to the lessons learned from the war in Ukraine, actually, for the aggression war that Russia fought in Ukraine, that moved to a long-term war, high intensity, plus expecting to full-scale war, yeah? Because of that particular framework, we've learned the fact that Europe's security will be not with Russia, but against Russia. And we are hearing this spelled by a number of representatives of state that we would never thought that would look differently to the realities, moving from the Ostpolitik of Willy Brandt and all the other developments in that area to Zeitenwende that we've heard of, and who was for sure made not in the 4 days, from the 23rd of February to the 27th, when it has been presented by Chancellor Scholz in front of the Bundestag, but way, way before that, as an alternative scenario, but who all of the decision makers at that level in Germany considered it's not possible. So actually scenarios is about relative certainties, it's about critical uncertainties, and for sure tipping points. And in that particular area, I'm coming back to what we can consider as being the lessons learned from Ukraine, because actually, okay, it shouldn't and it could not be all of them already revealed. Some are fake lessons learned, maybe. They are just changes that happen and maybe ideas that are coming on, but I'm trying to somehow to squeeze the full spectrum to a number of them that are really related to the security architecture of Europe. First, all of us, we hoped a better life. I don't think that there were too many discussing about the fact that we are going to have a full-scale war in Europe in the mid of the 21st century. That's a fact of life, and this comes with consequences. There is a full range of analysts who say, well, look, because the Cold War never has had actually costs for the Soviet Union or for the Russian Federation successor at the treaties of the Soviet Union, it was an extra impetus for the Russian Federation to move to war. They never pay for what they destroy in Central Eastern Europe, what they change and destroyed in the post-Soviet space in the independent states, and it gives them an extra impetus to move for the war. Second point, and very important, we are moving more and more in what is named economic security. And we are seeing, once again, the hard way. How does it mean to work with chains of supplies that are out of control or that are under the control of strategic rivals, if not competitors and even enemies? In that respect, export controls, economic security, we are looking forward to see the future common communication of the Commission, Council and Parliament related to the security economy of Europe in the second half of this year. And from the point that we already have seen coming from the President of the Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, we already have some hints how it's going to look. Okay, not decoupling, but this new concept of de-risking, actually moving to secure alternative sources, and in any case, to secure chains of supplies that would not put any of our countries under the control, under the very strict reaction to some of the states that are not sharing our values. Quite complicated. Because, once again, it's about Germany, who learned the hard way, as we learn all of us, that the liberal security through interdependence failed once one of the partners does not respect the rules of the game and the principles. If you have two countries that are respecting, sure, interdependence help. Once one of the countries does not respect, actually, it creates leverages and dependencies of the democratic countries from itself. And, by the way, they are using those leverages. And we saw this happening. We have some movements related to the market economy. We are cherishing the market economy. Market economy is going to be there. We cannot rule out or left aside the added value that market economy is giving to all our societies. But there is a price for security. And securitization of the chains and of supplies, and securitization of the developments of technology, of the property rights, all of these have an impact on how the market economy is going to work in the future, and it has also to do with the de-risking that I'm looking forward, as well as I'm sure all of you, to see how it's going to be conceptualized in the next 6 months at the EU level. Peace. We have a dramatic change on the debate related to peace. It's no longer about bargaining and concessions, as we once used to know. That's not peace. Peace is not the absence of war. Yes? Actually, peace means that all of the actors, or the biggest part of the actors, the most important part of the world, are respecting the rules-based order. Actually, the same rules, the international law, and by respect it means something more than observing and making interpretation relativizations, or for that matter, innuendos and running from what those provisions means. Resilience. We've seen the resilience of the Ukrainian society, who teaches us that it's no longer about quantity of weapons, capabilities, or people. But we have a number of immaterial and non-measurable indicators that will help into this. If you have a purpose, if you have the will to fight, if you have the moral, and it comes from having a suitable, well, Ukraine is doing its war of independence. Russia didn't succeed up to now, and I saw also the last statements of President Putin 1 year after the beginning of the war. Then on the 9th of May, on their Victory Day, so-called Victory Day, they don't have a narrative to tell very clearly and very simply to the Russian citizens what they are looking for in Ukraine. It's a Christmas tree with a lot of things, beginning with Maidan, coup attempt, Nazi, you name it. But that's not a clear narrative. And that makes the difference, and is making the difference. Another lessons learned. We've learned the hard way that you can't prevent Russian invasion. There's not such a thing as deterrence relating to the Russians. When we made some plans related especially to the Baltic states, we thought, okay, we have capabilities there already present. We are, if they attack, we are killing 1,000, 10,000. How many should we kill in order to make the deterrence happen for those territories? All the army. The whole army. We've seen in Bakhmut, we've seen in some other places that Russia does not care about human lives. They are using number of persons coming over the trenches, dying, and the only problem is, as some of my Ukrainian friends had said, we didn't have enough bullets to kill them. So you need to have capabilities, you need to have reserves, you need to have technology, yes, stable internet. Starlink made the difference in Ukraine. You need to have motivations, but you have to know when you're fighting such a country, you are moving to a war of attrition. And attrition means capacity of regenerating and rebuilding the force. Regenerating and rebuilding the force means that actually it's a matter of resilience of the society. And we fail to explain our society that it's for good, that the societies should come back and prepare themselves for fighting a war, long-term war. And this means a number of fundamental changes that needs to come back into the planning of the armies once we are accepting that full-scale war becomes a threat to our security, to Europe's security. It's very difficult once again. Sorry, I know that I'm near my time. It's very difficult to explain when you are in Spain, in Portugal, far away, that you need to invest in the war in Ukraine, and you need to prepare your industry to make huge quantity of weapons and ammunition in order to support this war so that it doesn't come at your doorsteps. And it's also a matter of defense that the fact that it's no longer a problem of the militaries. We knew that, well, but I'm not referring to the fact that that the war is far more important and tragic, that it doesn't need to be put only in the hands of the militaries. I'm not talking about that, but It's a matter of the whole of societies, and Ukraine told us that. Go figure out, and I'm ending on that note. What nation, who can say that his own nation will accept the costs of the personal dying in the first lines, will accept destroying its own country by fighting on its territory, so that to defend its independence, its choice of values, its perspective. And here, once again, for us in the West, the collective West, as we are calling it, in democracies, we need leadership, and we need to tell our people that the good days, or as somebody put it once, the holiday is over. War is back in Europe, and it's here to stay, at least for a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I will allow myself a very brief conclusion, my conclusion. You have enlarged the scope of rationality into the realm of irrational, which is surrounding us. Thank you. Now, being the cruel moderator of time, I announce you that we still have 40 minutes, which is quite generous. But if you could each have 10 minutes, then we will have Q&A for comments about 10 minutes. It's fair enough, but you have the floor, Dr. KAIM.
Okay, thank you to the organizers for having me this afternoon. I will be brief, and I would like to use my 8 minutes to talk a little bit about the institutions of the European security architecture. Because architecture needs pillars, architecture needs cornerstones, and the institutions we have, and we might create these kind of cornerstones and pillars of European security architecture. And I would like to make 4 quick points. The first one is quite obvious, that we do not have a comprehensive, all-encompassing, inclusive security institutions anymore. There has been the OSCE. It still exists, I know that, but we all know, and we have to be open about it, it's ineffective so far. It does not work as envisioned due to the consensus-based approach and the tensions within the OSCE between the major contributors, the major nations, and the major stakeholders in the OSCE process. So the deplorable outcome of the year 2022 is the overarching security institution does not exist anymore, with major consequences for European security. I think it has been a wise decision by, in particular, the Western governments not to withdraw from OSCE, not to destroy OSCE, but to consider OSCE to be some kind of in a dormant status, ineffective for the time being, for the political reasons, however, hoping for a better future, hoping that we don't have to renegotiate OSCE again. And this approach applies to NATO-Russia treaty as well. I think the same approach that applies to other treaties as well, NATO-Russia Founding Act as well. I think a clever move by Western governments not to withdraw from all these kind of institutions. But the sad status is we do not have this inclusive, comprehensive security institution anymore. That brings me to the 3 main purposes of security institutions in the European perspective. First, cooperative security. Second, collective defense. And the third purpose, crisis management. And the question, who's going to do what in the foreseeable future? As indicated, when I just mentioned the OSCE process, I think it's quite obvious that cooperative security has not a place in European security, in the European security architecture anymore. With its 2 dimensions, the military dimension on the one hand, meaning arms control and disarmament, confidence in security building measures, and the other part, human security, predominantly protection of minorities, democracy promotion, and a handful of other things. I cannot envision an OSCE process in which conventional arms control will be invigorated within the OSCE, at least for the time being, Therefore, I think we should be expecting a future in which all these cooperative security elements of European security architecture are conducted outside of OECD, meaning coalitions of the willing, multilateral formats, or bilateral agreements as it has happened before. Second, or third point, collective defense. And I think it's quite obvious that here all eyes are on NATO for obvious reasons. The Russian attack on Ukraine has reinvigorated NATO, which was called brain dead not so long ago. And I don't know the contrary to brain dead, but it's alive and kicking, I would say. And this has to do with the Russian attack on Ukraine. Therefore, the primacy in collective defense is on NATO, as illustrated by the Madrid summit last year, with its two key messages: reassurance for the Central and Eastern European states, and all measures directed against Russia. For political reasons, or in theoretically, we could speculate about an EU role in collective defense as well, which would be doable according to the Lisbon Treaty, but which is politically not feasible. I think that has been another key message of the last year. NATO is considered to be the prime forum for collective defense in all European countries, and all efforts to deepen integration in CSDP, in security and defense within the European context, are doomed to fail regardless of the legal provisions of the Lisbon Treaty. An open question, which I really consider to be an open question, is the future of the United States European posture in this regard. I think I'm not the only one which have been quite surprised about the strong commitment of the United States within this crisis of the last year, given the fact that we heard a different message during the first year of the Biden administration's foreign policy, emphasizing a different regional approach, Indo-Pacific, China, China, China. And therefore, I'm not the only one having been quite surprised about the strong, to put it, return of the United States to Europe. Return meaning 20,000 soldiers being deployed more to Europe, $80 billion being invested in Ukraine, and a handful of other things. My question, and I admit this is really an open question, is what we're currently seeing the new normal? Will this continue to be the case, this strong US commitment in Europe, will this continue to be the case for the not foreseeable future? Or is the new normal something different under President Biden too, or under Republican president, a return to the stance before, to the posture before, with a clearer commitment of the US interests in the Indo-Pacific, as indicated in the national security strategy of the last year. So this will be an open question, with major consequences for Europe in operational terms, in financial terms, and in institutional terms. Meaning that the whole question of burden sharing in the transatlantic context, in this context, would be, or must be, or could be readjusted. Final point, the future of crisis management. And here I think the one result of the year 2022 is that the majority of Western European countries, as well as the United States, will not participate in any crisis management operation anymore. That has to do not with the Russian attack on Ukraine, but more so with the disappointing experiences in Afghanistan, with the disappointing experiences in Mali, and a handful of other out-of-area operations. However, the conclusion in my country, but I think in the majority of all European countries, is never again, which is supported by the current blockade of the UN Security Council, which does not give mandates anymore for any kind of peace operations or out-of-area operations. But here I would use some caution. In the 1990s, everybody was quite confident, very sure about that we will never have to do collective defense, given the changed security environment in the year, let's say, 1995, after the end of the Cold War. And everybody prepared for out-of-area operations, crisis management operations, as we have seen them over the last 30 years. Currently, there's a tendency in my country, but I would add other countries as well, to emphasize we will never do crisis management for the foreseeable future. And here I would use some caution, and I think the current events in Sudan were some quite telling that it might be a little bit too early to abolish crisis management as a sub-purpose of European security institutions. I think it might be the case that we'll be confronted with civil wars in sub-Saharan Africa, that we need evacuation capacities, crisis intervention capacities in the foreseeable future. And therefore, I would point your attention to the European rapid deployment capacity, which will be operational or should be operational in 2025, which is about to include 5,000 soldiers so far, which is too little to do everything. However, I think we should be prepared to use it earlier than we expect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. KAIM. I think I will stick to my first conclusion on the ratio between rationality and irrationality. You have clinically approached from several angles the state of play of our realities. And I will return to the famous known unknowns of Donald Rumsfeld, and I think you have led us there. But it's a welcome compliment to the opening made by Mr. CHIFU. We can build on it. Mr. Ambassador DIACONESCU, please come into the fray. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I should like to extend my gratitude for this invitation, and really, at least from my perception, it is a very welcomed and very interesting meeting and exchange of views you have here during these days. Well, I shall be very brief, starting from the assumption, and I'm sure you understand it, that in this country, if you are going in the gas oil station, someone staying in the queue will ask you, Mr. Minister, they will come against us. Please tell us. So maybe I don't want to have much more sensitive or emotional approach, but we are looking forward to seeing the peace, but also we are very attentive to what will come after the peace. We have 1,200 kilometers of border with Ukraine. The military activities which were carried out last year in the Black Sea were close to our NATO and Romanian border, 40 kilometers in the Serpent Island. This is the factual situation. And again, I mention it just for the sake of underscoring how interested we are in every and each detail about what is going on and what will happen there. Looking forward to seeing the peace and the stability of the region coming as soon as possible. What is happening in the Black Sea does not rest in the Black Sea. I hope that this perception should be shared by all our partners, irrespective where from the geographical or strategic point of view they are placed. So, as I remember, and luckily this situation was changed after Madrid summit, NATO Madrid summit. After the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014, NATO took the necessary decision to have a forward presence, enhanced forward presence, with 4 battle groups in the north part of the flank, in the Baltics, around the Baltics in far north. When it was about the decision regarding the south part of the flank, the forward presence and the reaction of NATO was, from the political point of view, considered to be necessary as a tailored one. So it might be a difference, even for a desk officer looking from the eastern proximity to the north part and the eastern part. What about the solidarity? Okay, the situation was changed in the summer in Madrid, and now also we are looking in a consistent NATO battle groups presence also in Romania, Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Hungary. What about the future? Well, I'm a lawyer, and from the technical point of view, taking into account what might be the bigger perspective, it seems that there are three types of solutions. First of all, total victory. Total victory on the ground, but not only. A total victory also from the political point of view in the capitals. Which one? We shall see. The second one, cease of fire. It's very good. People will not die. This is the main assumption. We can start any type of debate, any type of attitude, any type of political consideration. But the third one might be a political treaty, ceasefire with some political arrangements. Well, taking into account the situation on the ground, now the expectations are very high, and it is normal coming from Ukraine. Also, there are some expectations coming from Russian Federations. And I shall go back to the very beginning of this preliminary dialogue before this war, when Russia said that, okay, they want to erase Ukraine from the map, irrespective what type of, let's say, post-truth or arguments they had in this regard, but also they asked something else, to reconsider the security guarantees at the level of 1997, sorry, and secondly, to reconsider all the arrangements and bilateral and multilateral treaties, including arms control, from nuclear to CFE, to conventional arms control. This might be the basis of discussion after the war. It's interesting. So, from this point of view, I think that both parties' expectations after the ceasefire are very significant, are a little bit too far to approach in a short period of time. In any case, including Ukraine, this part of NATO Euro-Atlantic space still will need to have guarantees for many, many years from now on. In 2003, I negotiated with the Russians a political general treaty. If you are looking to that bilateral treaty, which was ratified in both parliaments, or even State Duma in Russia, it seems that they liked the treaty, we had 3 or 4 paragraphs where Russia put their approach and their proof regarding respecting of the UN Charter, 1975 Helsinki Act, all the commitments and all the arrangements at the international levels which are normal for a country which is in progress to respect the values and the standards of a democratic life. None of these provisions, for the time being, are considered by Moscow. So, okay, we had a bilateral arrangements with them. What about the multilateral arrangements from this point of view? I remember when CFE treaty was negotiated, it was something amazing. 5 categories of conventional armed forces were practically put not only in a system of equal inspections coming from NATO to former Warsaw Treaty countries, amazing for the military personnel, but also in a reduction and destroying of these armaments, 5 significant combat armaments. When the situation failed, 1999 in Istanbul, when the Russians realized that they should do something better regarding Transnistria and their deployment of conventional military personnel in Transnistria. So this is the main core if you are speaking about security and stability around this Euro-Atlantic security area. Since 1992, all the problems and instabilities generated using arms were carried out around the Black Sea. 2008 Georgia, different huge military exercises with short notifying procedures and far beyond the limits of the military personnel being involved. What I wanted to say is that in any type of arrangements which be subject to peace, this region should be considered not only separate, of course, but should be considered very attentively. This region has a certain type of feeling that in a certain moment, if you are looking to the east, of course, in a certain moment, they are between blocks. If they are between huge arrangements, they might be a product. So they should consider to stay on one side or another side, taking into account different types of interest. From the political and diplomatic point of view, without speaking about military, this region needs help to be strengthened. Because if this region is strengthened, also moving to the west and as far as possible, everyone will feel much more free. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I was counting on the blend between what I was saying in the beginning, between the practicality of diplomacy, which has the knowledge of the procedures and the perceptions of the historical and concrete realities on the ground. And thus, the triad of this panel has been completed, but we will have to make a square. The square is Dr. Mussetti, and he will propose a different approach to complete the tableau, the picture. He will speak in Romania. Being an Italian, this will be an interesting exercise in Neo-Latin exchange. And he will give you another side of the moon, of in-depth picture between Romania and the Republic of Moldova. We will have to finish under the watchful eyes of Gheorghe Scutaru, who just left, at 10 minutes past 6. So try to go within those 10 minutes so as to have at least 2 questions at the end. Dr. Mussetti, aveți cuvântul.
Mulțumesc tuturor. Încerc să vorbesc limba română.
Romanian. I prepared some geopolitical maps. Look at this. This is the Isthmus region of Europe, the shortest path from Kaliningrad to Transnistria, from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea. But let's look at the western side, so our part. There are 2 pivot countries, Poland and Romania. These are pillars of our alliance. These are pillars of the eastern flank. In the north of Poland, we have the Aegis Asher missile base, and at Deveselu we have the anti-missile base. So north-south, in order to make the anti-missile shield the biggest one. And in the center of Poland we have Lask, an air base, and we also have Câmpia Turzii, an air base in Romania. These are two focal points of the eastern flank of NATO. These are the adequate zones for F-35, but also for military drones, such as MQ-9 or Reaper. But let's look at the harbors. Gdansk in Poland and Constanța in Romania. Gdansk and Constanța will be linked by a project, an initiative of the Three Seas Initiative. And the project is called Rail to Sea, and with the initiative's funds, a geo-economical project is being financed. But actually, it is a geostrategic project. Is it worthwhile to connect one semi-closed sea with another semi-closed sea when we should focus on a link with the Adriatic Sea at Trieste? No, but what is the purpose then of Rail to Sea project? It is for military mobility, to transport heavy military equipment on the eastern flank of NATO. This is the real objective of the project. And now let's look in depth where the troops, the NATO troops are in the western part of Romania and western part of Poland. So pretty far from the Russian front line and from Germany and from the Western Balkans. So basically, they are closer to the most powerful economic country in Europe for a swift intervention, and very close to the Balkans, basically, also for a swift intervention. This is the architecture that was conceived in many years. It was drafted before 2014, before the illegal annexation of Crimea, before the revolution in Kiev. This means that the US was back then ready to confront Russia. So we had been prepared for this. Has the war changed this structure? Has the war in Ukraine modified this security architecture? No, it only accelerated the process. For example, the US has set up a permanent base in Poland. And probably they will set up a permanent one in Romania as well, close to Craiova, because this is a region that needs more defense, more protection than Finland or the Baltic countries, because Romania and Poland are the pillars of the European security. We need to state that. So it's a sort of well-conceived trap in order to connect all European countries together, because the war in Ukraine is a sort of glue of the countries in Europe. because an alliance cannot survive without an enemy, without a big enemy. And without a big enemy, you have ethnic nationalist wars in this region of Europe, and this should be prevented. Washington has thought about it in advance and well, and this has only accelerated the process. For example, Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines were broken, and then a gas pipeline carrying gas from Norway to Germany until Poland was set up to transfer the Norwegian gas to the center of Europe. In Slovakia, for example, Bratislava is totally dependent from Russian gas. But if we bring the Norwegian gas through Poland to the center of Europe, there will be fewer and fewer problems. And the gas from the Caspian Sea needs to be brought through Romania to the center of Europe. Romania, Poland, symmetrically, geometrically, everything was well calculated. This is architecture. The war in Ukraine hasn't changed anything. It only accelerated the process. You should never forget that a tree that falls is more noisy than a forest that grows. Here in Romania, the forest is growing, so we need a lot of investments in Romania, because this is what the US has decided. Abrams tanks in the north in Poland and in the south in Romania. Anti-air defense systems, Patriot systems in Poland and in Romania. We sent one to Kiev. A big mistake. A big mistake. We've all noticed that. Do you know where the Patriot system will be transferred? To Lviv. So, in the western part of Ukraine, in the line Poland, Galicia, Romania. And what about the reconstruction timeline? The first project is to connect Leopoli, namely Lviv, to Kiev and Bucharest. Rail to sea, but in a rational manner, in a sensible manner. So everything is well aligned and well conceived. Therefore, we can't say that the war changed anything. No, it only accelerated a geopolitical process that started before the year 2014. I don't want to take more of your time, therefore, I dedicate the rest of my allocated time to Q&A. So, the well-conceived trap and the forest growing silently.
And the very well thought or designed trap, which is a geopolitical construction, in fact. Thank you. Now, we have a couple of more minutes to questions. Who dares to jump into, the ocean of this discussion? General, please. Sir Everard, you're welcome. May I? Can you? Thank you. Thank you so much.
I was only interested by your sense that EU, NATO had taken their eye off crisis management I mean, I don't feel that in NATO. I just feel that it hasn't been in the spotlight, and that actually our plans for crisis management are probably better now than they used to be. But is that a perception you think is widespread?
I mean, you have realized I actually repeated the three priorities of NATO's strategic concept: cooperative security, crisis management, collective defense. Therefore, I totally admit that crisis management will be, in political terms, maybe not a priority of NATO, but at least a sub-function. But my point was a political one. Given the changed geopolitical environment, linking Kabul 2021 with Kiev 2022, I think there is no appetite, no political appetite, regardless of the existing preparations you have undertaken to conduct any crisis management operations. And my point is that might be reasonable for the time being, but I would use some caution. Things might change quickly. Imagine that we will have at least some kind of ceasefire in the foreseeable future between Russia and Ukraine, and the political attention turns to a different region and to a different crisis. And Sudan is not settled yet. There's a danger of instability spilling over to other countries, to the whole region. And that might put pressure on NATO and/or the European Union to conduct peace operations in a wider sense again, and that should teach us a lesson in terms of operational planning, but also in terms of military capabilities to keep at least some military capabilities to conduct peace operations.
Anybody else going into the fray? If not, I would say I was the privileged moderator who, if in a concert hall, I would have asked for an encore, but I cannot, because I have to let the room for the next panel. But allow me to
Protecting what matters most is the mission that matters most. At Lockheed